Everyone knows about the Spanish Inquisition. Monty Python made jokes about it. Hollywood made movies. It's become a symbol of religious persecution, but almost no one talks about its neighbor. The Portuguese Inquisition lasted longer. In some ways, it was worse. And its consequences shaped the modern world in ways you've never heard. For nearly 300 years, Portugal systematically persecuted its own people, people whose families had lived there for over 1,000 years. It destroyed one of the most accomplished Jewish communities in Europe. It drove out the merchants, the scientists, the cartographers who had helped build the Portuguese Empire. And then, Portugal forgot. This is the story they don't teach in Portuguese schools. The story of how a nation turned on its own and what it cost them. This is the Portuguese Inquisition. To understand what was destroyed, you need to know what existed. Jews had lived in Portugal for over 1,000 years, possibly since Roman times. By the 15th century, they made up about 10% of the population. In some cities like Lisbon and Évora, the percentage was even higher. And they weren't marginal, they were essential. Jewish physicians treated Portuguese kings. Jewish astronomers created the navigation tables that made the Age of Discovery possible. Jewish financiers funded expeditions. Jewish cartographers drew the maps. Abraham Zacuto, a Jewish astronomer, created the astronomical tables that Vasco da Gama used to reach India. José Vicino, a Jewish mathematician, helped develop the techniques for determining latitude at sea. The discoverers sailed on Jewish science. Portugal was no paradise. Jews faced restrictions, had to live in designated quarters called judiarias, and periodically suffered violence. But compared to much of Europe, medieval Portugal was relatively tolerant. Jews could own property. They could practice professions. They could worship. For generations, Jewish and Christian Portuguese lived side by side. That was about to end. In 1492, Spain expelled its Jews. About 120,000 Spanish Jews fled. Many crossed the border into Portugal. King João II of Portugal let them in, for a price, a steep entry tax and permission to stay for only 8 months. When the 8 months ended, thousands were enslaved or expelled. Then João II died. His successor, Manuel I, seemed more sympathetic, but Manuel wanted to marry Isabella of Spain. And Spain demanded a condition. Portugal must expel its Jews too. Manuel faced a dilemma. He needed the Spanish alliance, but he also knew how valuable the Jews were to Portugal's economy and overseas expansion. So he found a solution, a terrible solution. In December 1496, Manuel ordered all Jews to convert to Christianity or leave Portugal within 10 months. But then he made leaving nearly impossible. Only the port of Lisbon was designated for departure. When Jews gathered there, they were told no ships were available. Then came the forced conversions. In April 1497, during Passover, soldiers seized Jewish children and forcibly baptized them. Parents who resisted were beaten. Some killed themselves and their children rather than submit. The adults were dragged to churches, had holy water thrown on them, and were declared Christians, and whether they consented or not. In a matter of weeks, Portugal's entire Jewish community, tens of thousands of people, was forcibly converted. They were now new Christians, Cristãos Novos. On paper, there were no more Jews in Portugal. In reality, an entire people had been traumatized into a false identity, and their nightmare was just beginning. The forced converts faced an impossible trap. They had been made Christian against their will, but the church now demanded they behave as genuine Christians, attend Mass, eat pork, work on Saturday, abandon every trace of their former faith. Many tried to comply. They had no choice, but many others, perhaps most, continued Jewish practices in secret. They lit candles on Friday night, they fasted on Yom Kippur, they avoided pork when they could, they became crypto-Jews, outwardly Christian, inwardly Jewish. For decades, the Portuguese crown protected them somewhat. Manuel I had promised the new Christians 20 years of immunity from religious investigation. His successor extended it. Why? Economics. The new Christians dominated trade, banking, and overseas commerce. They were too valuable to persecute. But pressure was building. The old Christians resented new Christian success. Rumors spread that the converts were secret Jews, mocking Christianity, corrupting the faith. In 1506, a Lisbon mob massacred between 2,000 and 4,000 new Christians over 3 days. Men, women, children, burned alive in the streets. The king punished the ringleaders, but the message was clear. The new Christians were not safe. They would never be safe. And then in 1536, the Inquisition came to Portugal. The Portuguese Inquisition was established in 1536 under King João III. Its official purpose, to root out heresy and ensure religious purity. Its actual function, to terrorize the new Christian population and seize their wealth. Here's how it worked. The Inquisition would arrive in a town and announce a grace period, typically 30 to 40 days. During this time, people could confess their sins and receive lighter punishment. But there was a catch. To receive grace, you had to name others, denounce your neighbors, your friends, your family. The system fed on itself. If you were denounced by anyone for any reason, you could be arrested. You wouldn't know who accused you. You wouldn't know the specific charges. You would simply disappear into the Inquisition's prisons. There, you might wait months or years for trial. The conditions were designed to break you. Isolation, darkness, minimal food, and then came the interrogations. Torture was legal and routine. The pole, suspension by the arms tied behind the back. The potro, a rack that slowly stretched the body. Water torture, sleep deprivation, the threat of worse. The goal was confession. Confess your sins. Name your accomplices. Many confessed to things they'd never done just to make it stop. If you confessed and repented, you might be reconciled, released after public humiliation, wearing a San Benito, a penitential garment, your property confiscated, your family shamed for generations. If you refused to confess or if you relapsed, you could be relaxed to the secular arm, a euphemism for being handed to the civil authorities for execution. The Inquisition didn't technically kill anyone, it just handed them over to be burned alive. The auto de fe, the act of faith, was the Inquisition's public face. These were elaborate ceremonies held in city squares, attended by royalty, nobility, and crowds of common people. The condemned were paraded in procession, wearing sanbenitos painted with flames and demons. Their sentences were read aloud. Those to be reconciled performed public penance. Those to be executed were led to the quemadero, the burning place, outside the city. The spectacles served multiple purposes. They were religious theater, demonstrating the church's power over heresy. They were social control, warning the population what happened to deviants, and they were entertainment. People came from miles around, vendors sold food. It was a festival of death. Between 1536 and 1821, the Portuguese Inquisition held hundreds of autos de fe. Approximately 1,800 people were burned alive. Another 30,000 plus were reconciled, tortured, humiliated, stripped of everything. The true numbers may be higher. Many records were lost or destroyed. And remember, the vast majority of victims were not foreigners or outsiders. They were Portuguese. Their families had been Portuguese for centuries, sometimes over a millennium. They were persecuted for practicing, or being suspected of practicing, the faith of their ancestors. A faith they had been forced to abandon at sword point. The new Christians who could flee, fled. But where could they go? Many went to the Ottoman Empire. Sultan Bayezid II famously welcomed Spanish Jews in 1492, reportedly saying Ferdinand of Spain had impoverished his own country and enriched the Ottoman. The same happened with Portuguese refugees. Thessaloniki, Salonika, became a majority Sephardic Jewish city. Portuguese was spoken in its streets for centuries. Others went to the Netherlands. Amsterdam's Jewish community was largely built by Portuguese refugees. They brought trade networks, capital, and expertise. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, which would dominate global trade, was partly funded and staffed by former Portuguese New Christians. Think about that. Portugal persecuted its merchant class. Those merchants fled to the Netherlands. Within a century, the Dutch had seized much of Portugal's trading empire in Asia. The Inquisition didn't just destroy lives. It may have destroyed Portugal's future. Others fled to Brazil, where Inquisition oversight was weaker. Crypto-Jewish communities survived in the Brazilian Northeast for centuries. Some descendants discovered their Jewish ancestry only recently, through DNA tests or family traditions they never understood. Lighting candles on Friday, avoiding pork, covering mirrors during mourning. Practices passed down for 500 years, their meaning forgotten but their form preserved. The Portuguese Inquisition was finally abolished in 1821. By then, there were virtually no Jews left in Portugal. A community that had existed for over 1,000 years had been erased, and then came the silence. Portugal never had a national reckoning with the Inquisition, not like Germany confronted the Holocaust, or South Africa confronted apartheid. The Inquisition became a footnote, an embarrassment, something to move past quickly. Portuguese schoolchildren learn about the discoveries in detail. The Inquisition gets a paragraph. In Lisbon, a monument marks the 1506 massacre. It was erected in 2008, 500 years after the event. The Inquisition's headquarters in Lisbon became the National Theatre. Few visitors know what happened there. In 2015, Portugal passed a law offering citizenship to descendants of Sephardic Jews expelled during the Inquisition. Tens of thousands applied. For many, it was an acknowledgement, finally, of what their ancestors suffered. But the law has been controversial, and the deeper reckoning has never come. Why does this matter? Because history shapes the present. The Inquisition didn't just kill individuals, it transformed Portuguese society. It created an atmosphere of suspicion, conformity, and fear that lasted centuries. Some historians argue it contributed to Portugal's relative decline, driving out the entrepreneurial class, punishing independent thought, creating a culture of orthodoxy over innovation. We can't know for certain, but we can acknowledge what happened. For nearly 300 years, the Portuguese Inquisition persecuted people for who they were. It destroyed families. It stole wealth. It burned people alive for practicing the faith of their ancestors, and then Portugal forgot. Today, there are descendants of Portuguese Jews scattered across the world, in Turkey, in the Netherlands, in Brazil, in the Americas.
Eureka.
Many don't know their history. Many are just discovering it. The candles lit on Friday nights, the family recipes that never included pork, the grandmothers who whispered strange prayers. 500 years later, fragments of memory survive. The Portuguese Inquisition lasted longer than the Spanish. It receives a fraction of the attention. Maybe it's time that changed. If this story moved you, subscribe. There are more hidden histories, stories that were buried but refused to disappear. See you in the next one.